B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Yoma Daf Lamed Gimel. We're going to start 9 lines from the bottom of Daf Lamed Beis Omid Beis. Says the Gemara, Heviu lo yesatomid kortzoi v'chulu. And this takes us back to the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Aleph Omid Beis, where the Mishnah says that they would bring to the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, they would bring him the korban tomid, the lamb. Kortzoi, he would make an incision just enough that the shlita should be called a valid shlita, and then umirik achir shlita al yodei, a different kohen would finish the shlita even though it's a valid shlita. If it's not a valid shlita, it's going to be a problem. Obviously the Kohen Gadol did a full valid shlita, but there was a mitzvah to completely cut and finish the shlita, and somebody else finished that. In the meantime, Kibel es Hadom, the Kohen Gadol was ready to receive the blood from the korban, mezorkoi, and then he would throw the blood on the mizbeach. Says the Gemara, my kortzoi. What does the word kortzoi mean? We translated it as an incision, as a minimal amount to cut the simonim, which we know that one's not allowed to eat an animal or a bird without shechting it. What's considered shchita? By a bird cutting one of the simonim, by an animal cutting two of the simonim. What are the simonim? The pipes, the food pipe, and the breathing pipe, the air pipe. One is the kone, one is the veshet. So one has to cut the minimum amount by an animal. One has to cut both, but it's enough to cut most of both. If you cut most of each of the simonim, most of the kona, most of the veshet, then the shlita is a kosher shlita. However, there's a mitzvah that another kohen should cut both simonim entirely. So the question is, the Gemara is saying the word kortzoi in the Mishnah, what does it actually mean? Omar Ula. Ula said, Lishna dektolahu, it's a term used for killing. Omer of Nachman by Yitzchok, Mikra, where would we find a pasuk that uses the word kortzoi and we would understand it means killing? Says the Gemara, it's a pasuk in Yirmiyah. The pasuk says, Eglo yefeifia Mitzrayim. There was something fair about Mitzrayim. However, keretz mitzofoin ba'avo. However, there's certainly going to be keretz coming from the north. Asks the Gemara, my mashma. What do you see? How do you understand the word keretz? Kedem Rabbi Yosef, like Rabbi Yosef would relate from the Targum, that it's Malka Yoi Hava Mitzrayim, that Mitzrayim was a fair kingdom. However, Amamin Ktulin, murderous people, Mitzvayno Yesun Allah, will come from the north. So you see that the translation of keretz is Ktulin, is killing, or murder. Says the Gemara, Kortzai Bekamo. We've already explained this, but when it says in the Mishnah kortzoi that they would kill the animal, they would do a minimum incision which renders the animal as having had a kosher shchita, how much is that? If one severs, one cuts most of each of the two simonim, the kono, the windpipe, and the veshet, the food pipe, then that's called kortzoi. Rabbi Yochanan says the same. We're about to see that it's apparent from Rish Lakish that he also holds that roiv of the two simonim is considered a shchita, not only regarding chulin, but even regarding hekdesh, regarding korbanis. To Amar Rish Lakish, because Rish Lakish said it's more in chulin, and there's an issue there in the Mishnayos in chulin daf chav zayin, where the Mishnah seems to repeat itself as to how much of the cutting of the simonim is considered a shchita. Rish Lakish asks, once we already learnt in the Mishnah in Chulin Daf Chav Zayin Omid Aleph that rubai shel echad k'moihu, that cutting roiv of a simon, of either the kono or the veshet, or both for that matter, is as if one cut the whole one. Lama shaninu, why did the Mishnah again have to summarize and say roiv echad ba'oif, that with the bird it's sufficient to shecht roiv of one simon, v'roiv shnayim b'behema, and roiv of two simonim by the behema? So, and Rish Lakish explained, Lefisha shoninu, and the answer is that because it says in our Mishnah here on Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, Heviu lo tomid, bring the Kohen Gadol the korban tomid, kortzoi, he should do the incision, umirik achir shchita al yodoi, and somebody else should finish the shchita, v'kibel es hadom v'zorkoi, and then the Kohen Gadol in the meantime would receive the blood and put on the mizbeach. Says Rish Lakish, Yochel, I may have thought that he's learning this into our Mishnah. The Mishnah says somebody else had to be Meirak, had to finish off the shlita. So I may have thought, Loi Meirak, if somebody else doesn't finish off the shlita, Yehi Posel, it will be Posel. And then we would understand that, at least regarding Korbonos, that one has to actually shecht both simonim entirely. And that's why, and I may have thought that way. And the Gemara is interrupting now and saying, just a minute, could you really have thought that? Would you really have thought that if you don't shech the entire two simonim, that by a korban that the shchita is not considered shchita? How you can't understand our Mishnah that way, because if so, then who finished the shchita? Not the Kohen Gadol, a different Kohen, that second Kohen, and that's called that the avodah was finished by somebody else. Did we not learn Kol avodas Yom Kippurim einon ksherus eloboi? Did we not learn that on all the avodah on Yom Kippur must be done exclusively by the Kohen Gadol? Says the Gemara Hochi Kamar. This is what Rish Lakish meant. Of course, min ha-Torah, shechting roiv of the two simonim is enough. But I may have thought that midrabanon, if somebody else doesn't finish the shchita, that it's going to be possible by korbanos. Lekach shaninu. That's why the Mishnah in Chulin repeats itself to say roiv echad b'oiv, v'roiv shnaim b'oif, v'roiv shnaim b'behema, to impress on us that not only by Chulin but even by korbanos, if somebody else did not finish the shchita and the Kohen Gadol just did the minimum shchita, then it's not possible even midrabanon. Says the Gemara, if that's true, that if that second Kohen didn't finish the shchita, it's not possible. Why did he have to finish the shchita? Let the Kohen do the shchita, roiv of the two simonim, and that will suffice. Says the Gemara, you're right, as far as the shchita is concerned. However, mitzvah lemorik, there's a special mitzvah to finish the shchita, Rashi says, in order that the blood should come out nicely, it should flow out comfortably, and into to be makabel the dam, to receive the blood, and therefore there was a mitzvah for the second kohen to continue the shchita beyond what Hilchos shchita would have required. Continues the next Gemara, and now we're going to have a considerably long brisa or long Gemara, and this is known and it's a famous piece of Gemara. Abaya, Masadir, Marocha. Parts of this we mentioned already on Daf Yodaled. The Abaya, he arranged the Marocha, which means the Seder of the Avodah every day, Mishmei de Gemara, in the name of the tradition that he had, how the Avodah was done every day. Valibad de Abashol, because regarding one specific detail, whether the Ketores was done after the menorah was entirely prepared for the lighting, or whether the Ketores was done before they finished doing the Hatovas Haneros, that was a machleikas between Abba Shaul and the Rabbanon. And the Rabbanon say that the Ketores was done before the menorah was finished being prepared. After preparing 5 candles, they would do the Kohen would do the Ketores, and then they would prepare the second 2 candles. That's according to the Rabbanon. We saw this on Daf Tezvav Amud Aleph, but according to Abba Shaul, the Ketores was done only after they finished entirely preparing the menorah, and Abaya arranged the Seder of the Avodah according to Abba Shaul. And now in this list of Abaya, there's going to be 15 details, and the order is very important. They have to have been done exactly in this order. And the Brisa hardly tells us the sources why it has to be in this order, but the Gemara afterwards, the second half of today's daf, we're going to learn the sources of each of these 15, why one comes before the other. So let's see what they are. The first is Marocha Gedoyla Kodemes LeMarocha Shniya Shel Ketores. On the outside Mizbeach, on the big Mizbeach, there was more than 2, but we're talking now about 2. There were 2 fireplaces, 2 bonfires there. One was called the Marocha Gedoyla, which is the big fireplace where all the korbanos were put, and there was a Marocha Shniya, there was a second fireplace on the Mizbeach, which is where the coals that were taken from there and taken into the Heichal, put onto the small Mizbeach in order to put the Ketores onto those coals. Those coals were taken from a second Marocha on the big Mizbeach. Both of these Marochas had to be arranged every morning. Which one was first? Says Abaya, first the Marocha Gedoyla was arranged, and only then the Marocha Shniya of the Ketores. Marocha Shnia shel K'teres koidemes l'sidur shnei gizrei eitzim. After they would arrange the small marocha of the K'teres, they would then arrange the 2 logs of wood that were put on top of the rest of the arrangements of the wood on the big fireplace. That was number 3. And then sidur shnei gizrei eitzim, that was koidem, that was before the dishun mizbeach hapnimi, before cleaning away the ashes from the top of the inside mizbeach, the mizbeach and the heichal, and that was done 4th. And then v'dishon mizbeach hapnimi koidem latovas chomesh neiros. What was done 5th was they would prepare 5 of the neiros of the menorah. After that, v'tovas chomesh neiros was koidem ladam hatomid. After the 5 neiros were prepared, they would do the shlita of the shlita and the zrika of the korban tomid, not putting the ivorim on the mizbeach. That will come later. For now, the shlita and the zrika, that's called the dam hatomid, and that's what actually brought a kapora. It's a korban oila. The korban oila is also a kapora for mitzvahs aseh, for mitzvahs lo aseh, hanitek la aseh. That was the dam tomid. Afterwards, v'dam tomid koidem latovas shtei neiros. After doing the korban tomid, the shlita and the zrika, they would be mative. They would prepare the last 2 candles of the menorah. Afterwards, they would do the K'teres. They would put the K'teres in the Mizbeach HaPnimi, in the Heichal, on top of the coals that were taken from the Marocha Shnia of the big Mizbeach, taken to the small Mizbeach, and on that was put the K'teres. And then K'teres Koidem Leivorim. After that, they would put the limbs of the Korban Tomid onto the Mizbeach. And then Veivorim LeMincha, the Eivorim was before the Mincha. A korban oila had to be brought with a mincha. As it says in the pasuk, the mincha was brought with the korban tomid and put on the mizbeach. So that after the ivorim were put on the mizbeach, the mincha was put on the mizbeach. And then mincha lechavitin, the mincha was done before the chavitin. The chavitin was what the kohen gadol would have to bring every day, or would have to belong to the kohen gadol. Anybody could offer it on, any kohen could put on the mizbeach, but the mincha, it's also a mincha. The minchas chavitin followed the mincha that was for the korban tomid. The chavitin lenesachim. After the chavitim, the nesachim, the wine was poured on the mizbeach. Unesachim the musafim. In the event that it was Shabbos and there was a korban musaf, then after the nesachim of the korban tomid were put on the mizbeach, the musafim was done. Musafin the bazichim, the musaf came before the bazichin. The musaf was put on the mizbeach before the bazichin, the 2 spoons of levaina that accompanied the lechem aponim were put onto the mizbeach. Ubazichin the tomid shel ben arbaim, and after the bazichin, the levaina in these 2 spoons from the lechem aponim was put onto the mizbeach, then they would do the final avodah of the day, the tomid shel ben arbaim. That would be the afternoon korban tomid. Shenemar, and this is the only source brought in by Abaya. Shenemar v'hiktir oleo. This is a pasuk speaking about the korban tomid shel shachris, the first korban tomid. It says in the pasuk, v'ho'ish al hamizbeach tukad boy. The fire on the mizbeach would burn on the mizbeach. Loisichbe, it would not be extinguished. Uvi'ir oleo ha'kohanim eitzim baboiker. They would prepare the fireplace in the morning. We'll soon see a little bit more what this is referring to. V'orach oleo ha'oila. And they would put the korban tomid, it would be the first korban that would go onto the fireplace. V'hiktir oleo chelvei hashlomim, and the fats of the shlomim would be put on it. So from these words, chelvei hashlomim, the Gemara learns out, what does it mean, the hashlomim? We read it as if it said hashleim, to complete, which means on the korban tomid shel shachar, you should complete and put all the other korbanos, and not on the korban tomid shel ben arbaim, which means no other korbanos are put onto the mizbeach after the korban tomid shel ben arbaim. Oleo hashleim, on the korban tomid shel shachar, hashleim kol korbanos kulam, all the relevant korbanos of the day should be put after the korban tomid shel shachar, before the korban tomid shel ben arbaim. That's the end of Abaya, the Sidur HaMarocha, according to Abaya, from Mishmei de Gemara V'Aliba de Abba Shaul. And now the Gemara, starting from here, is going to go through the sources of each one of these 15 stages, proof why it was exactly in this order. Number 1, Omar Mar. Marocha Gedoyla Kidemes the Marocha Shnio Shel K'teres Minolon. What's the source that when arranging the Mizbeach, the Marocha Gedoyla has to be arranged before the small fireplace from where the coals were taken for the K'teres? Answers the Gemara de Tanya. This is something we learned in a brayso, so we're going to see this later on in Mirz Hashem, that the Pasuk says, Tzavas Aaron Responov Lemur, Zois Teiras Ha'oilo Hi Ha'oilo Al Moikto Ala Mizbeach Kol Halaylo Ad HaBoiker Ve'eish HaMizbeach Tukad Boi. That the Pasuk here is seems to be referring to two types of fires. Al Moikto Ala Mizbeach Kol Halaylo Ad HaBoiker Ve'eish HaMizbeach Tukad Boi. What are these two fires? The Brisa says, Hi ha'oilo al moikto al mizbeach kol halaylo is referring to Zu Marocha Gedoylo is referring to the big fireplace on the Mizbeach. Ve'eish HaMizbeach Tukad Boi is alluding to the Zu Marocha Shniya Shel K'toires. So the order is first the Marocha Gedoylo, and then the Marocha Shniya. Asks the Gemara of Eipechano, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the first part, that the al moikto al mizbeach kol halaylo ad haboker is referring to the Marocha Shniya, and the Ve'eish HaMizbeach Tukad Boi is talking about Marocha Gedoylo. Answers the Gemara, no. Mistabra Marocha Gedoylo Hadifa. It's probable, that means in the Pasuk you see that there's two, one before the other. So it must be that it's Dafka, one and then the other, and not just by fluke, do whatever you want. You have to follow one before the other, and logic dictates that the one that always comes first is the Marocha Gedoylo. Why? Shekein Kaparosa Meruba, because all the different korbanos go onto this main fire, and it atones for many different things. However, the small Marocha, the only thing it was used for was to take the coals and put it onto the Mizbeach HaPnimi in the Heichal. For the K'toires, all it did was the K'toires, and therefore it was not Kaparosa Meruba, and therefore logic dictates that that's the fireplace that was arranged second. Says the Gemara, Adarabba, I've got logic to say that the Pasuk probably meant that the Marocha Shniya is first. Marocha Shniya adifa. Why? Shekein machnisin mimeno lifnim. Because from the second Marocha, the small Marocha on this outside Mizbeach, they will take from the coals and bring inside the Heichal. So maybe there's an advantage. Maybe that one should be first. From the big fireplace, they never took coals into the Heichal. Says the Gemara, you're right. It seems to be that there's an advantage also of the second fireplace, of the Marocha Shniya of the K'toires. Afilu hacha kaparosa meruba adifa. Logic still dictates that the fact that from the big fireplace atones for so many more things, that probably that one should be done first. The Ibois Ema, or it could be that you're right, that the truth is that the second Marocha has this advantage that it goes into the Heichal. However, even the first Marocha has the same advantage. We said before that the coals of the first Marocha never find their way into the Heichal, and that is a disadvantage relative to the second Marocha. No. I'll explain to you why the first Marocha can also find its way into the Heichal. Iloi mishkach eitzim lemarocha shniya, miloi mail mimarocha gedoyla. If you don't find any wood for the second marocha, do we not use the woods, the coals from the marocha gedoyla that would ultimately find their way into the Heichal? So you see that at a pinch, even the woods from the first Marocha would find their way into the Heichal, and therefore in that aspect they share the same advantage, and therefore the big Marocha, which has the added advantage of Kaparosa Meruba, that's the one that has to be done first. So now we've determined why the Marocha Gedoyla was arranged before the Marocha Shniya Shel K'toires. Now we're moving to the next thing. Marocha Shniya Shel K'toires Tkidemes Lesidur Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. That before finishing arranging the big fireplace by putting the two logs on top, they would first arrange the small Marocha of the K'toires. Why? Minolon. Says the Gemara D'chsiv, it says in the Pasuk, says the Pasuk we mentioned before, V'ho'eish ala mizbeach tukad boi lo yisichbe, uvi'er oleho ha'koyin, that the kohen should arrange on it, on the big marocha, eitzim, baboiker, the two gizre eitzim, the two logs, you know where you should put them? Put them onto the big marocha. That's where you have to put them. The question is, well, where else do you want me to put them? The answer is, well, you could have put them on the small marocha. Could I have put them on the small marocha? Yes, but then it must be that the small marocha has already been arranged. So if you see that the Pasuk is telling us explicitly, put the two gizra eitzim on the big marocha, it must be that before putting the two gizra eitzim on the big marocha, the small marocha has already been arranged. Put the two gizra eitzim on the big marocha, not on the other fire, the small marocha. Michlal, So you see from here that by the time you're doing the 2 Gizrei Eitzim, the small marocha has already been prepared. So from here you see that the small marocha was done before the Shtei Gizrei Eitzim. Asks the Gemara, from that word oleo, ubeir oleo hakoyin, we can't use it to say put it on the big marocha and don't put it onto the small marocha. V'hai oleo miboile legufei. I need the word oleo to say put it onto the big marocha and not next to the big marocha. But it doesn't mean to the exclusion of a different marocha. That's how the Ritva explains this. V'hai oleo miboile legufei. Answers the Gemara, Trei oleo ksivi. Look in the pasuk, you'll see it says a number of times the word oleo. One of them to tell you it has to be on the marocha, not next to the marocha, and another one to tell us that it has to be on the big marocha and not on the small marocha. If you look in the pasuk, it actually says 3 times the word oleo, and the Gemara here says Trei oleo ksivi, it says 2, and the Ritva discusses which of the oleos the Gemara means. Continues the Gemara, now we're up to stage 3. So we know that first was the Marocha Gedola, and then there was the Marocha Shnia, and then was the Siddur of the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, and the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim is Koidem, the Siddur Shnei Gizrei Eitzim was Koidem to the 4th thing. What was next? L'dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi, it was before the cleaning away the ashes of the coals on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, the small Mizbeach in the Heichal. Afal Gav, even though the hocha regarding the 2 Gizrei Eitzim, ksiv, it says in the pasuk baboiker baboiker, v'hocha, and regarding the dishon mizbeach hapnimi also ksiv, it says in the pasuk baboiker baboiker. So really, because what does the word baboiker baboiker means early in the morning? If it would say once baboiker, it would be a bit later. Baboiker baboiker means even earlier. But if they both say baboiker baboiker, I may have thought that there's no preference which one is first. No. Afilahacha machshir odif, since the 2 Gizrei Eitzim are going to go onto the big mizbeach, and the wood of the mizbeach is what's used to prepare and going to be used for the k'teres, since it's a machshir, it's a preparation for the k'teres, that's done first, and only afterwards the mizbeach hapnimi is cleared away. Asks the Gemara, machshir ma'iniu. What's the machshir here? You're telling me that even though it says baboiker baboiker by the Gizrei Eitzim, it says baboiker baboiker by the dishon mizbeach hapnimi, but the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim is first because it's machshir ma'iniu Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. We're talking here about the 2 Gizrei Eitzim. Are the 2 Gizrei Eitzim really machshir? What are they machshir? The machshir for the k'teres? Well, they're not. We just saw before that where did the 2 Gizrei Eitzim go? On the big marocha. Where were the coals taken from for the k'teres in the mizbeach hapnimi? From the small marocha. So how can you say that the 2 Gizrei Eitzim are a preparation for the k'teres and therefore they were first? They were not a preparation for the k'teres. So we're going to have a few answers to this. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Shem Eitzim. The concept of wood which is turned into coals, which is a preparation for k'teres, is wood. Once you know that you need wood for the k'teres, it doesn't matter which woods. Make sure that all the woods are done before anything else. And therefore the 2 Gizrei Eitzim, which are also wood, even though they're not going onto the small fireplace, and they're not going to be used directly for the k'teres, nonetheless, it's in the same bracket as woods which are a preparation for k'teres and therefore are done before the dishon mizbeach hapnimi. That was Rabbi Yirmiyah's explanation. Ravina Omar, Hoil v'hischil b'marocha goymir. Ravina says that the reason that the 2 Gizrei Eitzim were before the dishon mizbeach hapnimi was actually because the 2 Gizrei Eitzim is preparing the mizbeach. Since you started preparing the mizbeach, first the marocha gedola and then the marocha shnia, before you do anything else, finish preparing the mizbeach and put the Shtei Gizrei Eitzim onto the Marocha Gedola. Rav Ashi says, Iloi mashkach eitzim leMarocha shnia. We saw this before. If they would not find woods on the small Marocha coals to be used for the k'teres, miloi mayil miMarocha Gedola, will they not use the coals of the big Marocha? So you see that even the wood from the big Marocha could find its way onto the Mizbeach HaPnimi for the K'teres. So even the Shtei Gizrei Eitzim are considered a machshir. Since it's considered a machshir, it's odif, and therefore it comes first before the dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi. Continues the Gemara, next stage. V'dishon mizbeach hapnimi koidem latovas chomesh neiros. Before they would start preparing the 5 candles of the menorah, they would first do the dishon mizbeach hapnimi. My tama. Omer Abaya. Abaya says Gemara Gemirna svara lo yadana. That's what we accepted. That was the tradition. We know it to be true. I don't know. We can't make up a logic. We don't know the source. Rava Omar. Rava says, I'll explain to you why they first took care of the Mizbeach HaPnimi before the Menorah. Because there's a rule, a concept which Rish Lakish introduced to us. The Omer Rish Lakish, Ein mavirin ala mitzvahs. When you have to do a mitzvah, you have to do 2 mitzvahs. Don't bypass a mitzvah. You come towards a mitzvah, you reach the place of mitzvah, do this mitzvah. Don't bypass the opportunity. When you actually go into the heichal, what are you going to meet first? First thing of what was in the mizbeach? What was in the heichal? Sorry, there was the mizbeach hapnimi, there was the menorah, and there was the shulchan. Where were they? We'll soon see exactly. But the first kli, the first utensil that was found, that was met, if you'd walk into the heichal, first is the mizbeach. Since that's the first kli that you come to, take care, do the mitzvah of the mizbeach, dishon mizbeach hapnimi, prepare the mizbeach hapnimi. Afterwards, you can progress and go further into the heichal, you'll come to the menorah and you can start preparing the menorah. Where do we know, what's the source that the mizbeach was closer to the entrance of the heichal than the menorah? The Tanya we learnt in the Braisa, shulchan b'tzofin, the table with the 2 piles of 6 lechem aponim on each, the 12 breads was on the tzofin, which when you come into the heichal, it was on the right-hand side, which was north. Moshuch min ha'kaisel shtei amis umechza, 2.5 amis away from the tzofin wall. U'menorah b'dorim, menorah was on the right, on the dorim, on the south. Meshukah min ha'kaisel shtei amis umechza, there were a lot of comparisons, we'll soon see, but there's a lot of similarities between the menorah and the shulchan. And the same way as the shulchan was 2.5 amas away from the wall, that's learnt out from Psukim, so too the menorah was 2.5 amas away from the wall on the dorim. Mizbeach memutza, the mizbeach was exactly in the middle of the heichal. V'oimed be'emtza. However, u'moshuch klape chutz kimo, it was slightly closer to the mizrach, to the east, to the entrance of the heichal. And that's what it says in the Braisa. And so you see clearly, when you walk into the heichal, what are you going to reach first? The mizbeach. Ein mavirin ala mitzvahs, first do the tishon mizbeach hapnimi, and only then start with the tovas haneris. Asks the Braisa v'noikma l'hadayu, why don't you put the shulchan exactly in between why don't you put the mizbeach, exactly in between the shulchan and the menorah? Says the Gemara, kiven dichsiv, since it says in the pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'samto es hashulchan michutz lapareiches." The shulchan was placed outside the pareiches, outside the kodesh hakadoshim, with the curtain outside, the curtain separating the heichal from the kodesh hakadoshim. V'es hamenorah noichach hashulchan, and put the menorah facing the shulchan. So from the fact that it says noichach, it was facing, but inon dechazu adodi, they have to, so to speak, be seeing each other. If you put the mizbeach hapnimi in between them, then the menorah will not be noichach, will not be facing the shulchan, and therefore the menorah, the shulchan was, therefore the mizbeach, was closer to the mizrach, to the entrance of the heichal, and not exactly between the shulchan and the menorah, and therefore in mavirin ala mitzvahs, the dishon mizbeach hapnimi was first. Omar Rava. Rava, and this is just by the way, the Rava says, Shema minom mit Rish Lakish, from this concept, the Rish Lakish says, Ein mavirin ala mitzvahs, we learn another halacha. When a person's right hand would be going up towards his forehead, the first thing that he comes into contact with, or he would come close to, would be his left arm. And only then his right arm, his right hand would head towards his forehead. We know there's a mitzvah to put tefillin shel yad on one's hand and tefillin shel rosh on one's forehead. So since we know ein mavirin ala mitzvahs, make sure to first put on the tefillin shel yad, because the hand which needs the tefillin shel yad is first. Don't bypass that. Shema minom Rish Lakish, the avurei daro atoitofa, in order to bypass the arm and first go to the forehead, it's also to do that. Heicha of it. So how should you put on the tefillin? Midaro, first put on the tefillin on the yad, on the arm, and then the toitofta, and then you can proceed and go to the forehead and put the tefillin shel rosh on one's head. Continues the Gemara, we're going now to the next two stages. We've learned Marocha Gedolos first, and then Marocha Shniya, and then Sidur Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, and then Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi, and then Hatovas, 5 of the Neiros. And then the Dam Tomid, we saw that the Korban Tomid was shechted, and the blood was put on the Mizbeach, and then they would finish preparing the Menorah, the Hatovas Shtei Neiros, and we'll see later, after that was the Ketores. So now the Gemara is going to discuss this. Hatovas Chomesh Neiros, preparing the 5 Neiros, was Koidim L'Dam HaTomid, was before the Shlita and Zrikas Dam of Korban Tomid. But that was the Dam Tomid, that was the 6th thing to do. The Dam HaTomid Koidim L'Hatovas Shtei Neiros, and only after the Shchita and Zrikas Dam HaTomid, they would then do the Hatovas Shtei Neiros, they would prepare the last 2 candles of the Menorah. My Tama, what would be the source for this sequence, for this order? So Amar Rabbi. So Rabbi said as follows. And let's go back now to the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. The Gemara mentioned before, by the way, that the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, it said Baboiker, and by the Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi it also said Baboiker. And the Gemara says, why? If it says them both, why? What's your source that there's a preference to the Gizrei Eitzim before the Dishon Mizbeach? And the Gemara said, because Machshir Odif, the Gizrei Eitzim, is a preparation for the Ketores, and therefore it's first. Okay, fine, granted. But what do we now do with the Baboiker that it says of the Shtei Gizrei Eitzim? We don't need the Baboiker to tell us when to put the 2 Gizrei Eitzim on the Marocha Gedola. The question then, what do we need those 2 Baboikers for? Answers the Gemara. That's what Abai is going to address now. Hahu baboiker. These 2 words, baboiker, the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, deloit tzrichi, because I don't need them to tell us when to do the Shtei Gizrei Eitzim. Shotinu lahacha. You should, so to speak, this is a rule that we know as im einu inyan la. If you don't need it for one thing, tenehu le'inyan something else. So here also, I don't need the baboiker for the Shtei Gizrei Eitzim. I can take the 2 baboikers and use them elsewhere. So what am I going to do? I'm chad shadyo la tovas chomesh neiros. And the truth is, by the tovas neiros, by the 5 neiros in the posuk, it already says twice baboiker. I'm going to take one of the boikers of the Shtei Gizrei Eitzim and add it, so to speak, to the 2 existing baboikers by the tovas chamish neiros. Delikadmi ledam hatomid. Because by the dam hatomid, how many times baboiker does it say by the dam hatomid? Just once. And we're about to see that the second baboiker of the Shtei Gizrei Eitzim is going to be given, so to speak, to the Dam HaTomid. So the Dam HaTomid has 1 of its own and 1 from the Shtei Gizrei Eitzim. Hatovas Chamisha Neiros has 2 of its own and 1 from the Shtei Gizrei Eitzim. So which one has more baboikers? The Hatovas Chamisha Neiros. And the more baboikers there are, the earlier it is. And that's why the Hatovas Chamisha Neiros is before the Dam HaTomid. Let's see that inside. Chad shadyo la'atovas chomesh neiros. One of the baboikas of the Gizrei Eitzim we put with the hatovas chomesh neiros delikadmi ledam tomid. So it should be before the dam hatomid. V'chad shadyo ledam hatomid, and the other one we're going to give to the dam hatomid. Why? Delikadmi la'atovas shtei neiros, in order that it should be before the hatovas shtei neiros, because by the hatovas shtei neiros it says explicitly baboiker. By the Dam HaTomid it says just once boiker. So if you only have 1 baboiker by the Dam HaTomid, it would have to be after that Tovas Shtei Neiros. But we say no. The Dam HaTomid also has 2, 1 of its own and one of the Shtei Gizrei Eitzim. Chad shadyo la'atovas chamisha neiros delikadmi ledam tomid dehachat losa. Because once you've given one of the baboikers of the Shtei Gizrei Eitzim to the Hatovas Neiros, you've got by the Hatovas Chamisha Neiros, Tlos, you've got 3, V'hacha Trei, and by the Dam Tomid you only have 2, 1 of its own and 1 from the Shtei Gizrei Eitzim, and therefore we know that the Hatovas Chamisha Neiros is before the Dam Tomid. V'chad shadyo ledam hatomid denikadmi la'atovas Shtei Neiros, and the reason that we gave the second baboiker to the Dam HaTomid was in order that it should be before that Tovas Shtei Neiros. Afal gav the Hocha Trei, even though once you do that, the Dam HaTomid and the Tovas Shtei Neiros both have 2. Nonetheless, the dam hatomid is before the hatovas shtei neiros, because mechaper odif. The dam hatomid is a kapara, and since and as we said before, that even though it's a korban oila, but an oila is mechaper for mitzvahs aseh and for mitzvahs lo yisaseh shenitzei kla aseh, and therefore the dam hatomid is before the hatovas shtei neiros. And now the Gemara is going to ask a question, or Papa is going to ask a question against Abaya. So what did we just see now? That the hatovas two neiros is last because it just said last in this sequence. We're talking here about the dishon mizbeach hapnimi, hatovas chamisha neiros, dam tomid, and hatovas shtei neiros. So what did we see? Hatovas shtei neiros achreinim, the last two candles, that was the last because it says twice baboiker. Dam tomid was before it because it says but also baboiker, one of its own and one that baboiker received from the shtei gizreitzim. So it's the same as far as baboiker is concerned as the hatovas shtei neiros. And the reason dam hatomid is before is because it's a mechaper. Hatovas chamisha neiros is even before the dam hatomid, even though dam tomid is mechaper, but the hatovas chamisha neiros is before because it has 3 times the baboiker, 2 of its own, and 1 from the gizreitzim. And the dishon mizbeach hapnimi is before them. And the reason it's before is because ein mavir ala mitzvahs. That's what Abaya said. Rav Papa is asking a simple question now. Instead of hatovas chamisha neiros being 3, 2 of its own, and 1 from the shtei gizreitzim, no. Let's keep it at 2. And then it can drop 1 level down, and the dam tomid then, which is also 2, will automatically go 1 up, because it's a mechaper. The only reason the dam tomid is after hatovas chamisha neiros according to Abaya is because chamisha neiros has 3 times baboiker. Let's not give the 1 baboiker to the chamisha neiros. Let's drop that down once, and then the dam tomid will come up because it's the mechaper. It will be first. And the reason that the dishon mizbeach hapnimi will be before the dam tomid is because that second baboiker, which we're not going to give to hatovas shtei neiros, will give it to the dishon hamizbeach. Now the dishon mizbeach hapnimi will have 3 baboikers, 2 of its own plus 1 from the shtei gizreitzim, so that will be first. And then the dam tomid, which is a mechaper, which has 2 baboikers, and then hatovas chamisha neiros, which has 2 also, and then hatovas shtei neiros, which has 2. So that's more or less the question of the Gemara. Why is dam tomid between the chamisha neiros and the 2 neiros? Let's put it between the dishon hamizbeach and the hatovas chamisha neiros, and there'll be nothing between the hatovas chamisha neiros and the hatovas shtei neiros. We know that you have to split up the preparing of the menorah. No problem. You'll split it up. You'll prepare the 5 neiros. You'll come out of the heichal. You'll wait a few minutes or however long, and then you'll go back in and you'll do it again, and you'll continue. You'll finish off preparing the last 2 neiros of the menorah. But you won't have to do the dam tomid, the korban tomid, in between the preparation of the candles. That's Rav Papa's question. Let's see it inside. Omale Rav Papa la'Abaya. Va'ema, why don't you say that one of the 2 baboikers of the shtei gizreitzim chad shadyo ledishon mizbeach hapnimi is going to be, we'll add it to the 2 existing baboikers by the dishon mizbeach hapnimi. Denekadme ledam hatomid, in order that it should be before the dam hatomid. The hochet losa, because the dishon mizbeach hapnimi will now have 3 baboikers. V'hocha trei, and the dam hatomid will have just 2. V'chad, and the other baboiker of the shtei gizreitzim shadio ledam hatomid, you'll give it to the dam hatomid, and now the dam hatomid will also be 2. The nikdom la hatovas chamisha neiros, in order that it should be before the hatovas chamisha neiros, because if you don't add on a baboiker to the dam tomid, the fact that it's a mechaper won't be enough. So we need to make that it's baboiker by the dam tomid and by the hatovas chamisha neiros, and then we can say dam tomid has the added virtue of being a mechaper. It will be first. The avalgav the hochatrei v'hochatrei, even though the dam tomid and the hatovas chamisha neiros will both have 2, nonetheless trei mechaper. That was the question Rav Papa asked Abaya. Answers the Gemara, or asks the Gemara against Rav Papa, Imkein afsuke b'may mafsikus lehu. How are you going to interrupt? What gap, what break are you going to make between preparing the 5 candles of the menorah and the 2 candles in the menorah? That's the big question here. So the Gemara says, according to Reish Lakish, who says the Omar Loma Metivin V'Chayzinu Metivin, Reish Lakish says the reason that they split up the preparing of the menorah and they did first 5 and then 2 is K'dei Lahargish Es HaHazara Kula that in order to cause an excitement in the Azara with people ruffling around and going in and going out, and that causes an excitement which is good. It's a covet for the Melech. Shapir, we can understand that you don't have to do something in between. You just have to come out, wait a bit, and then go back in and continue. Elol Rabbi Yochanan, but called Rabbi Yochanan argues with the Shlokish and says the Omar Baboiker Chilkul Shtei Bekorim. It says Baboiker, but the Nero is to tell us that it's as if it's a different time of the morning. And how would you separate one time from the other time? By doing a different avodah in between. Ma'ikal Amema, what are you going to say? According to you, Rav Papa, there's no avodah between the two. So it's not considered baboiker. So that's how the Gemara refutes Rav Papa's question. Continues the Gemara. Omar le Ravina le Rav Ashi. Ravina is now asking Rav Ashi a question, and this question applies to Abaye as well as to Rav Papa. That everything we just now said is explaining, was based on the fact that you have twice the words baboike by the shtei gizrei eitzim, and they don't need to be there because they would have been there just to say that the shtei gizrei eitzim are before the dish on mizbeach hapnimi, because it's baboike earlier in the morning, but we don't need them because the shtei gizrei eitzim are first because machshir odif. So if so, and therefore you had them spare. And Abaye said, give one baboiker to that Tovas Chamisha Neiros to make it into 3 baboikers, and one to the Dam Tomid, which is then 2 baboikers. And then you have first Chamisha Neiros, and then the Dam Tomid, which is 2 baboikers plus being a Mechapir, and then that Tovas Shtei Neiros, which is just 2 baboikers. So that's fine. The problem is, says Ravina to Rav Ashi, Hi baboiker da'etzim, the words baboiker the shtei gizreitzim, mimiyatir, are they spare at all? Homiboyele legufe. I need it for itself to tell us the Ka'amar Achmona nekadmu lemarocha shnia shel k'teires. That the reason it says baboiker but the shtei gizreitzim is to tell us that you have to put the shtei gizreitzim before arranging the second marocha. Oh yes? That's new to us. We just learned before that the Marocha Shnia was done before the Siddur Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. Omar Lei v'lav mi ekimno, did we not just learn the Oleo v'lo al Chaverta? That we learned from the Pasuk Oleo that the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim are put onto the big Marocha only after the small Marocha is prepared? Michlal de'isya lechaverta. And we see from there that the small Marocha Shnia has already been prepared before you do the Shtei Gizrei Eitzim. In which case it's pashut incorrect what you Ravina have said, that baboike or Shtei Gizrei Eitzim is needed to tell us that you put the Shtei Gizrei Eitzim before arranging the Marocha Shnia. It's not true. Continues the Gemara. Ma'ishno da'ovid hatovas chamisha neiros bereisha. We know that you have to split up the menorah, the preparing of the menorah. We saw Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Shlokish. Why? Either to make an extra excitement, or from the pasuk that says baboiker, split up into so to speak 2 different times of the morning, and that would mean make sure you do a different avodah in between. The Gemara is saying, Ma'ishno da'ovid hatovas chamisha neiros bereisha, never hatovas shtei neiros bereisha. Why do you do first the 5 candles and then the 2 candles? Maybe you should do the 2 candles first and afterwards the 5. Says the Gemara, given to Aschelbu, since you starting the preparing of the menorah is, since you start with that, ovid's ruba. Therefore you do most. You had 7 candles to prepare. You have to start, it's appropriate to start with most of them, not with 2. Says the Gemara, you want to do most of them? V'nevet shis. So do 6 first, and then the last one you'll do afterwards when you go back and finish off the preparing of the menorah, either after the Dam Tomid. And the way Abaye said, after the Dam Tomid, you will do the last 2. The last 2, just leave 1 for then. Says the Gemara, no. That when you prepare the neiros in plural before being yaktireno, before doing the k'teires. Ve'ein neiros, the term neiros is plural. Pusos mishtayim, it's not less than 2. So you leave a minimum of 2, and the other 5 you start with before doing the Dam Tomid. Continues the Gemara. V'atovas shtei neiros, we know that the atovas of the 2 neiros has to be before koidemes. The k'teires is before the k'teires. And this is actually the Abba Shaul part of this brisa, because on Daf Tezvav Amud Aleph we saw that according to the Rabbanon, the k'teires is actually done before doing the hatava of the 2 neiros. According to the Rabbanon, the Dam Tomid was before any of the Hatovas HaNeiros, then Hatovas Chamisha Neiros, and then the K'teires, and then the Tovas Shtei Neiros, and then the Ivorim. So this is the Abba Shaul part that says that Tovas Shtei Neiros is Kodemis L'Kteres. The Kteres is after you're completely finished preparing the menorah. He learns it from a pasuk. The Omakra, it says in the pasuk, Behetivo Yes HaNeiros. First, you entirely finish preparing the menorah. V'hador Yaktiren, and only afterwards you do the Kteres. Continues the Gemara. The next step was Kteres LeIvorim. After doing the Kteres, then you would put the Ivorim, the limbs of the Korban Tomid, onto the Mizbeach. The Tanya we learned in the Braisa, Yukdam Dovar, Shenemar Boy, Baboiker, since by the Kteres it says Baboiker, and by the Ivorim it just says once Baboiker. So the way it says Baboiker means earlier in the morning. Like we said before, Baboiker is earlier than Baboiker. And therefore, Yuktam Dovosh, Nema Boy Baboiker, the Dovosh, Lenema Boy Laboiker Echot Belvad, Kteres, where it says twice Baboiker, is before Ivorim, which only says once Baboiker. Continues the Gemara. The next step was Ivorim Lemincha. After putting the limbs onto the Mizbeach, only then you could do the mincha that went with the Korban Oila, with the Korban Tomid, was put on the Mizbeach. The Tanya we learned in the Braisa, Minayin shelo yehi dova koidem letomid shel shachar. How do we know that nothing should be put before the Evorim? That means the first thing that's put onto the Mizbeach is the limbs of the Korban Tomid shel shachar. Talmud Loima, it says in the pasuk, we've seen it a few times, v'orach oleh ha'oila, that what's put on the new fireplace, on the new fire, is the oila, is the Korban Tomid. And therefore the Ivorim have to go first, and only after that is the Mincha. When it says in the Pasuk, the oila, what's the oila? The Korban Tomid, that needs to be put onto the Mizbeach first. And that is the Ivorim, that's the source that Ivorim have to be before the Mincha. And what's the source that the mincha has to be put onto the mizbeach before the chavitin? Says the Gemara, because it says in the pasuk, "Eile mo'adei Hashem asher tikru isam mikroi kodesh lahakriv ishe l'Hashem oila u'mincha." Immediately after the oila, you take the mincha that's associated to that oila and you put it onto the mizbeach. And so therefore, over here you have the Korban Tomid, the oila. First thing after you put the limbs on the mizbeach, you put the mincha onto the mizbeach. Only afterwards you do the chavitin. The next step, the chavitin l'nisachim. The chavitin are put on the mizbeach before the wine. Why? Shum mincha, because we said that after the oila is the mincha. The first thing after the oila is the mincha that's associated to this oila directly, which is the mincha that we mentioned before, the flour that belongs to this Korban Tomid. Immediately afterwards is another mincha. It's the mincha of the Kohen Gadol called the chavitin. Since it's also called mincha, we put it on the mizbeach straight after the mincha that belongs to the oila. Nesachim lemusafim. Before doing the Korban Musaf, if it's Shabbos, you do the nesachim. You put the wine on the. You pour the wine on the mizbeach. Also, that's the nesachim belongs to the Korban Oila. You learn that out from the pasuk that says, in that same pasuk, L'hakriv ishe l'Hashem oila u'mincha zevach u'nesachim dvar yom b'yomoy. Immediately after the zevach, after the korban, before any other korbanos, put the nesachim, put the wines onto the mizbeach, and therefore after the chavitin, which is in the same group as the mincha, which has to go immediately after the ivorim, as it says oila mincha, straight after that the nesachim. Umusafin bezichin, and this is actually a machloikas that we've seen elsewhere, but according to this brayse here, that according to Abaya, the way he was mesader the marocha, the musafin is koidim lebuzichin, as we saw. Lav mi omrus baboiker lahaktim, hachanami bayoim laachir. By the korban musaf, it just says once the word bayoim, but the bezichin it says bayoim twice, and therefore the bayoim means later on in the day. Baboiker means earlier in the morning. Bayoim means later in the day. And since it says by the bezichin bayoim, it's done later than the musafin where it says just bayoim. Says the Gemara, "My tam leman to Omar bezichin koidmin lemusafin." So we understand that Abaya was masada, the musafin was koidim lebezichin. He brings the pasuk. He says bayoim is after bayoim. But how about the opinion that says that the bezichin were koidim lemusafin? What would be the source for that? Gomar chuka chuka michavitin. It says chuka by chavitin, and we said the chavitin was even before the nesachim. It says chuka by chavitin, and it says chuka by the bezichin. So you see the bezichin have to be put on as soon as possible after the chavitin, even before the musafin. Imi hosam gomar. If so, that chuka, that straight after the chavitin has to be the bezichin even before the musafin, imihasam goma ligmara kula milsa mihasam. Then why don't you put on the bezichin even before the nesachim? Straight after the chavitin, chuka, put on the bezichin. Says the Gemara, no. Lahachi ahani bayoim bayoim. The bayoim that it says by the bezichin, even though according to that opinion, he doesn't say that it's after the musafin, where it just says once bayoim. No, musafin is last because bezichin have to be first because it's got to be closer to the chavitin. But since it says bayoim, it can be delayed a little bit, and there can be the nesachim between the chavitin and the bezichin. And that's that opinion. And in the next shiur, we're going to go back to the Mishnah and we're going to continue the next Gemara.